Every Thursday, we go in depth with the chief. Here's Lisa Monahan.
Oklahoma City's top cop here this morning to talk about school security. Welcome, Chief. Students making that big return to the classroom today. There is certainly a feeling of uneasiness following the mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas. Share with us for our viewers what OCPD has been doing to prepare for today and even the worst case scenario.
So for many years, we've been training and preparing for these type of events. It goes back to the events of Columbine. Police departments across the country changed how they respond to these type of incidents, and no longer sitting back and waiting, but getting inside and making sure that we stop that threat. And that's what the Oklahoma City Police Department's been training, been working with the different school systems for many years so that we have a proactive and a successful response if something is to happen.
We've seen on Oklahoma City Police's Facebook page, officers in these schools sort of mapping out the lay of the land in the schools. Is this something that you guys are doing as a reactive measure to what occurred just last year, or is this something that's been going on behind the scenes?
This is something that's been done for a long time. Even when I was a commander over our tactical unit back in 2010 through 2012, we used to go and help school systems, come up with making sure we were checking their exits and that doors were secured, but also too taking those school floor plans and mapping those and putting those in our CAD system so the police officers have access to those. What you've seen recently is division commanders have been taking officers out to the schools and just making sure the police officers have eyes on it if there's any new officers at the division that haven't been to those schools before. And we're just making sure now that they know what the school looks like too from a first-hand standpoint, not just a map.
It may seem like a no-brainer, but is this to help in response time if something were to happen? How critical would it be to know the lay of the land?
Absolutely. If anything was to happen, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a school shooting. It could just be a teacher making a call or a school administrator that something is suspicious outside of their school and they want us to check that out. Having that lay of the land and knowing exactly if they mention a certain playground or something like that, the officers know where to go and look when they get that call.
That's certainly comforting. What about intruder drills? We've heard a lot about intruder drills. Are you guys actively working with the schools on these intruder drills?
We have in the past on those, and especially our school resource officers. During the summer, they do a lot of training, not only with the school systems, but just on their own as well in how to respond to these type of events. And we want to make sure that their training is up to date. Just recently, our school contract was renewed with Oklahoma City Public Schools, but we have officers in schools all around the Oklahoma City area. Some of them are employed in an off-duty capacity. Sometimes you have officers from other agencies, but we work closely with those agencies to make sure we're communicating and addressing any threats.
Are you reevaluating any sort of police response in the event of an emergency after what we've seen nationwide?
We do that every time a large-scale event, something happens that gains national attention. We look at their after-action reports. We do everything we can to learn from that. And really what I think we're doing a better job of here in Oklahoma City is working more on the proactive side of that. So let's say, for example, a student was to notice something or have another student say something that they felt was threatening, and they take that to a teacher or a principal. That information gets to us. We now have a better ability to track that down through social media and other resources to try and prevent an incident from happening. So that's really our goal, is can we get these intercepted at that stage where somebody becomes suspicious and prevent something bad from happening.
Good to know. We are out of time for today. This is an important discussion, though. We want to continue it. We'll be discussing school safety measures again next week. So if you have a specific question for the chief, you can send us an email to chatwiththechief@griffin.news. We'll be tackling this topic again next Thursday. We'll see you then. We are grateful to have Chief Wade Gorley back in studio this morning on what has been a very difficult week for law enforcement and for our community. Tomorrow, Sergeant Bobby Swartz, an Oklahoma County deputy killed in the line of duty, will be laid to rest. Deputy Mark Johns now recovering from his injuries. I know tragic events such as these will have a significant impact on the law enforcement community. And Chief, how is OCPD handling this?
First of all, in Oklahoma County and all of the metro area with Oklahoma City, we surround several cities, several municipalities, several different law enforcement agencies. We all work very closely together. We know each other. We've worked together for a lot of years. And it definitely has an impact, something as significant as that. is just not something that you ever want to see, a call that you ever want to respond to. And it does have an impact on our officers as well. They especially the ones that responded and were the initial responding officers. I've viewed their body cams and looked at what they did on the initial response, and it's absolutely incredible. I'm so amazed every day at what our people do and how they function under very difficult circumstances. But from here, mostly now, we want to make sure that they're okay, and that our wellness unit is visiting with them, and it's definitely had a serious impact on those individuals, those officers that were the first ones there.
And this is the second notable ambush on law enforcement in just 2 weeks' time. How do you reassure your officers?
The biggest thing we can do as an agency, and really for any agency in law enforcement, is number one, you make sure your people have the absolute best equipment, that they can go to work with every day, and we do that. But then second is training and how we train our officers. We just completed a complete training for all of our sector-based patrol officers throughout the department in our reality-based training unit, and putting them in several situations and talking about ambushes and how to approach calls and houses and those things. And so that's really about the best we can do, is make sure they're trained and equipped and ready to go and face whatever's in front of them every day.
And with attacks on law enforcement becoming more common, what do you think is attributing to this? Why are we seeing more of this?
Quite honestly, there's been a lot of rhetoric in the last couple of years that has just turned toward making police the enemy, making law enforcement in this country the enemy. And I really think that's part of it. I think that's where, when you have someone who's already on the edge anyway, they can easily obtain firearms and ammunition now, and they're already on that edge, and you put the ideology in their head that law enforcement is the enemy, it works as a justification for them to take these kind of actions, and it makes it a lot more difficult on our officers. And I can tell you, I've been in law enforcement with the Oklahoma City Police Department almost 33 years, working most of that time as a patrol officer in a patrol car, making traffic stops, answering calls. And we are seeing so many more firearms in the people that we encounter than we've ever seen by far. And these are individuals a lot of times that are not, they're not people that you really want in possession of firearms. These are people that are known to commit crimes, and the types of firearms that they have are way more advanced than what I saw early in my career out on patrol. When we rarely ran across firearms. Used to, when you ran across a firearm on a call or a traffic stop, it was a big deal, and now it's almost daily that officers are running across these. So
what is the solution to prevent this in the future?
I think the biggest thing is, everybody talks about Second Amendment rights and the rights to own firearms, and absolutely, we want those folks that are good law members of society to have firearms, but we have to have better ways to remove firearms from those individuals that aren't, those individuals that want to do harm. And one of the things that we do at the Oklahoma City Police Department, and law enforcement is doing all across the country, is working hard to identify these individuals ahead of time, before it gets to this point. But then we also need laws that can help us when we do encounter someone that should not be in possession of firearms, that we're able to get those away from that individual. And that's what you see a lot of times is, law enforcement knows who these individuals are. They're people that we encounter regularly that are out there committing crimes, and just having that, the teeth and the ability to take a firearm away from someone, sometimes before they have a felony conviction, is really what we need when we identify, these individuals that could be a danger to the public.
Chief, we so appreciate your input on this difficult topic. We're keeping all of law enforcement in our prayers. And coming up next week, we'll be taking a closer look at the resources available to officers who may be struggling with these types of events, whether it be responding to horrific crime scenes or even grieving a loss of their own. If you have a question, as always, you can email chatwiththechief@griffin.news, and we'll be sure to get you some answers. See you next week. Well, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and it's designed to honor those who overcame abuse and sadly those who didn't. Chief Wade Gorley getting in on the conversation this morning. Good morning to you. We first want to start by taking a look at the statewide stats. Okay, a recent study found about 21% of women and 10% of men in Oklahoma are victims of domestic abuse. That's a startling statistic. And then if you look at 97% of women killed in Oklahoma knew the person who killed them. So I ask you, would you say that it's about the same or worse just for Oklahoma City metro area?
Anytime you have a larger metropolitan area, you're going to get more of these types of calls, and domestics are pretty high in the category of calls that we receive on a daily basis. Domestic type complaints that we get through 911.
So let's take a quick moment to discuss. We have the stats on the men and the women. Those are oftentimes parents, and there are young victims of domestic violence. How often do you see that children are impacted by domestic violence in their homes?
Unfortunately, it's more times than you would like to imagine, because again, like you said, these domestic relationships, oftentimes there are children involved in the home, and the children witness this, and it's very traumatic to them as well.
How often are you guys responding to these types of calls right now?
It's very frequent. Really, since the pandemic, we've seen a rise in these type of calls. We noticed in 2020 there was an increase when people were cooped up at home more, and they would have these type of arguments and things that would get started, and police would get called to those. But since we've come out of the pandemic, schools are back in session, those kind of things. We're getting more and more of these types of reports and able to get involved and try and help these individuals.
Well, it is great that you are there to get involved. Obviously, the goal with this Awareness Month is to have people who may be stuck in that situation, help them get out. What sort of advice do you have for someone who may feel as though they're just stuck in a dangerous situation?
So in Oklahoma City and Oklahoma County, we have the Family Justice Center, and we partner with them, also called Palomar. And so when someone calls 911 and that process is started, they basically get what we call a one-stop shop for help. Our detectives are in this building, so they can handle the criminal side of it, and then anything that person may need, if it's a VPO, if it's just social services help, even pets. If they have pets and they're worried about taking the pets out of the home, to get help. A lot of times that's an impediment. Even at Palomar, they can help with all of those things. So it's just one place where the person can get help, and the children can get the resources they need as well.
Oh, that is great that those resources are available to anyone who feels stuck in a situation. Thank you for chiming in this morning. We also want to pass along some very important information. Okay, if you or someone you know may be involved in one of these situations, you can see that number right there on your screen, 1-800-522-SAFE. That's 7233 to get some help. Thank you for being with us, Chief, and as always, we'll see you next week. Oklahoma City Police Chief Wade Gorley back in studio this morning for our chat with the Chief. And Chief, Halloween just a few days away now. I love the costume, by the way. No, really, maybe I could borrow it. What are some things that parents can do to make sure their kids stay safe this Halloween?
So I think it's very important that when the parents take their kids trick-or-treating, they're familiar with the areas that they're going into, just familiar neighborhoods, those kind of things. Reflective clothing is very good, and that's one of the things that people don't think about a lot is how dangerous it is from a pedestrian standpoint. Kids get excited, they want to run and be to the next house. And so carrying a flashlight, use that buddy system so that you don't get separated, you don't get lost. And then stay on those sidewalks as much as you can in those neighborhoods and be very careful crossing the street.
I know there's so much excitement on these nights. Okay, what about the older kiddos though? A lot of them still like to go out and enjoy Halloween. What can parents do to stay safe with the older kids in mind?
I think just making sure they know, where those kids are at. A lot of the older kids have cell phones, so maybe they can track their locations or at least stay in touch with them and make sure the kids are checking in regularly. And again, it's just that safety in mind. The older kids too, they get excited just like the younger ones, and just agreeing on a time to be home, traveling in familiar areas, and then not being on your phone when you're crossing the street and doing those things that you need to be more aware of your surroundings.
Okay, and if your neighborhood is like my neighborhood, there are always tons of cars in the neighborhood, bringing kids in, dropping them off, letting them trick-or-treating. What would you say to folks that may not be participating in the actual trick-or-treating activities, but just to be mindful in the neighborhoods? Yeah,
that's a big thing for drivers to remember, is there will be a lot of kids out there, and they will be, moving across the traffic ways. And the biggest thing is just slow down. Those pedestrians, those kids, they can come out in front of you very quick. You don't want to be on your phone. You always want to be paying attention. It's getting dark a little bit earlier now. And then, of course, the biggest thing is don't drink and drive. We will be out. We will be making traffic stops and making sure everyone's safe. And if you're drinking and driving, you're gonna pay the price for that.
Such great advice. I know I was teasing you about the costume, but I always see a lot of little police officers on my doorstep, and I love it.
Absolutely.
You have a costume this year?
You're looking at it. This is it.
Love it.
This is all for me. And I always, those kids that show up to the door wearing those costumes, I'm hoping maybe they'll be one of our future officers too. So we're hiring and we need them.
I love it. Thank you so much for being with
You
us
bet. Thank you for
today
having
and
me.
every Thursday. To join in on this conversation, just email chatwiththechief@griffin.news, and we'll see you next week.